Nora Turner believed in the quiet magic of stories. Her small apartment in Adams Morgan was a testament to this, a cozy sanctuary where overflowing bookshelves formed canyons of paper and ink. As a university librarian, her world was one of ordered knowledge and the gentle rustle of turning pages. It was a world that felt a universe away from Maxwell Prescott's. He had walked into her life like a character from a different kind of story, one of inherited prestige, Georgetown estates, and the effortless confidence that came with a name that opened doors all over Washington, D.C. Their romance was a whirlwind, a collision of two orbits that, against all odds, seemed to align perfectly. He loved her calm, her sharp mind, and the way she saw the world without the cynical filter of his own social strata. She loved his surprising warmth, his quick laugh, and the way he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating book he'd ever discovered. But every story needs its antagonist, and Nora's had a name: Victoria Prescott. Maxwell's mother was a formidable woman, chiseled from generations of wealth and influence. From their first meeting over tea at the Hay Adams, Victoria had made her disapproval clear. It wasn't in loud pronouncements, but in the subtle, cutting art of the elite. It was in the way her eyes scanned Nora's simple dress, the faint, tight smile that never reached her eyes, and the pointed questions about a family tree that, for Nora, ended abruptly with the D.C. foster care system. "An orphan," Victoria had murmured, taking a slow sip of her Earl Grey, the words landing like chips of ice. "How resilient of you." Tonight, as Nora arranged a vase of fresh tulips on her small dining table, she felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Maxwell was coming over, and he'd be bringing the final invitations for their wedding. The wedding. It felt both thrilling and terrifying. She loved Maxwell, she truly did, but marrying him meant marrying into the Prescott dynasty. It meant a lifetime of navigating Victoria's icy disapproval. When Maxwell arrived, all smiles and carrying a bottle of expensive champagne, her worries momentarily dissolved. He wrapped her in his arms, his chin resting on her head. "Smells like home," he murmured, a stark contrast to the sterile, museum-like quality of his own family's residence. He popped the cork on the champagne and laid the invitation proofs on the table. The calligraphy was exquisite, the cardstock impossibly thick. "The Prescott and Turner families," he read, then faltered slightly. The space after her name felt like a void. "It's perfect," Nora said, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. "My mother wants to host a small final planning dinner at the Legacy Hall next week," he said, his tone casual. "Just the three of us, our planners, and the lawyers to go over the last few details." The mention of lawyers sent a fresh chill down Nora's spine. She knew it was standard for a family like the Prescotts, but it felt like another reminder that this wasn't just a marriage, it was a merger, and she was the vastly smaller company with no assets to her name. She nodded, her reflection in the window showing a woman standing on the precipice of a world she wasn't sure she was ready for. The Prescott family's annual foundation gala was a cornerstone of the D.C. social calendar, a glittering affair held in the grand ballroom of the National Portrait Gallery. For Nora, it felt less like a party, and more like a final exam for which she had not been given the syllabus. Dressed in a navy silk gown Maxwell had insisted on buying for her, a gown that cost more than her rent for 3 months, she felt like an actress playing a role she hadn't properly rehearsed. 3 months. Victoria Prescott was in her element, a queen holding court. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a frozen smile plastered on her face as she accepted air kisses and hollow pleasantries. She introduced Nora with a subtle but distinct lack of enthusiasm. "And this," she would say, her hand gesturing vaguely in Nora's direction, "is Maxwell's fiancée, Nora." The pause was always just long enough to be awkward, her tone suggesting Nora was a temporary curiosity rather than a future daughter-in-law. The cracks in Nora's fairy tale began to show under the glare of the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. While Maxwell was pulled into endless conversations with senators, lobbyists, and other scions of old money, Nora was left to drift at the edges. A woman with a diamond necklace that could likely fund Nora's library for a decade asked her what she did. And when Nora replied that she was a librarian, the woman's face went blank. "Oh," she said, before turning away to flag down a passing waiter. Victoria, noticing Nora standing alone, glided over. "Having a lovely time, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "You must be quite overwhelmed. It's a very different world from yours." Before Nora could formulate a response, Victoria's eyes flickered to her gown. "That color is adequate on you, I suppose. Though it does little to give you any real presence. We'll have to work on that." The words were a dismissal, a clear statement that Nora, as she was not enough. Later that evening, in the back of the chauffeured car driving them home, the silence was heavy. "Your mother was particularly sharp tonight," Nora said quietly, twisting the fabric of her dress in her hands. Maxwell, who had been scrolling through emails on his phone, looked up with a sigh. "Nora, don't take it so personally. That's just Mom being Mom. She's stressed with the wedding, that's all." Nora felt a surge of frustration. "She told me my dress wasn't good enough, Maxwell, in front of a dozen people. That's not stress. That's cruelty." He reached over and took her hand, but his touch felt placating rather than supportive. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. She's from a different generation. She's just trying to help you fit in. Give her a chance." But Nora had been giving her a chance for months. The problem wasn't Victoria's generation. It was her refusal to see Nora as anything more than a project to be molded or a problem to be managed. For the first time, Nora looked at the handsome man beside her and saw not a partner, but a buffer for his mother's toxicity. He wasn't standing with her. He was standing between them, and that was a very different and much lonelier place to be. Victoria had insisted on a weekend trip to Charleston to finalize the wedding dress, declaring that the boutiques in D.C. were simply not up to the Prescott standard. The chosen location was a hyper-exclusive salon on King Street, a place so rarefied that the windows were frosted for privacy, and entry was by appointment only. The interior was a sea of white silk, champagne flutes, and hushed, reverent tones. To Nora, it felt like a beautiful, suffocating cage. She stood on a small pedestal in front of a triptych of mirrors, dressed in a gown of intricate lace and satin that felt more like a costume than a wedding dress. It was the fifth one she'd tried on, and with each one, Victoria's critiques had grown more pointed. "That cut does nothing for your frame. It makes you look boyish," she'd announced about one. "The beading on that is far too ostentatious for someone of your background," she'd declared about another. The fawning attendants fluttered around Victoria, ignoring Nora almost completely. "Mrs. Prescott has such an impeccable eye," one of them cooed. Victoria smiled, a predator enjoying her power. "We need something that conveys tradition, legacy, something to give her a bit of stature." She looked at Nora's reflection in the mirror, her gaze clinical and cold. "It's such a shame you don't have your own mother to share this moment with, dear. I imagine she would have had some opinions. But I suppose I will have to do." The cruelty of the remark, delivered so casually in front of strangers, struck Nora like a physical blow. All the air went out of the room. She felt her eyes begin to burn, but she refused to cry. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction. She met the older woman's gaze in the mirror, her own expression hardening into a mask of stoicism. The drive back to their hotel was thick with unspoken tension. Maxwell, who had been dutifully nodding along to his mother's every comment in the salon, finally seemed to sense the depth of Nora's anger. "Today was a lot, I know," he began, his voice hesitant. Nora turned to face him, her voice low and trembling with fury. "She used the fact that I'm an orphan to insult me, Maxwell. In a room full of people. She said it was a shame my mother wasn't there." Maxwell had the grace to look ashamed. "I know. I heard. It was out of line. I'll talk to her." "Will you?" Nora challenged, her voice rising. "Or will you just tell her to be more subtle next time? When are you going to stand up for me? When are you going to tell her that I am the person you are going to marry, and she needs to treat me with basic human respect?" He scrubbed a hand over his face, looking exhausted. "Nora, please, can we not do this? You don't understand the pressure she's under, the family's image. She just wants what's best for us." But Nora finally understood. What Victoria wanted was what was best for the Prescott name. And Maxwell, her beloved, charming Maxwell, would always ultimately agree with his mother. The beautiful dress, the lavish wedding, the man sitting next to her. It was all part of a gilded cage, and she was beginning to realize the door was about to lock behind her. The Prescott Legacy Hall was not a place for celebration. It was a monument to power, a cavernous room in the family's Georgetown estate paneled in dark, unforgiving mahogany. The walls were lined with oil portraits of stern-faced Prescott ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow Nora's every move with silent judgment. This was where the rehearsal dinner was held, and the atmosphere was as heavy and oppressive as the velvet drapes that swallowed the evening light. The dinner itself was a masterclass in polite, joyless conversation. Maxwell sat beside her, his hand resting performatively on her back, but his attention was elsewhere. He laughed at an uncle's dry joke, debated tax law with a cousin, and nodded earnestly as Victoria detailed the seating chart complications. Nora felt like a ghost at the feast, a placeholder in a life that had been planned long before she came along. She pushed a single scallop around her plate, the clinking of silverware against fine china sounding unnaturally loud in the stilted silence. Once the caterers had cleared the last of the dessert plates, and the few other family members had offered their stiff goodbyes, the mood in the room shifted. The pretense of a social gathering evaporated, replaced by a cold, corporate chill. Victoria, who had been playing the role of gracious hostess, settled back in her chair at the head of the long table, her expression all business. Two men in severe dark suits, who had been sitting silently at the far end of the table, moved their chairs closer. Nora recognized them as the Prescott family lawyers. "Maxwell, Nora," Victoria began, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth. "Before the festivities tomorrow, we have a final piece of business to attend to. A mere formality, of course." Maxwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat, refusing to meet Nora's questioning gaze. He stared intently at his water glass, as if it held the secrets to the universe. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, pierced through Nora's unease. This was not a formality, this was an ambush. One of the lawyers, a man with a thin, lipless mouth, slid a thick leather-bound document across the polished surface of the table. It stopped directly in front of Nora, its presence seeming to suck all the remaining warmth from the room. The document was embossed with gold lettering, stark against the dark blue leather. Two words stood out, catching the light of the overhead chandelier, seeming to burn themselves into her retinas. Prenuptial agreement. Nora stared at it, her heart sinking. She had known this was a possibility, but the staging of it, late at night, in this intimidating hall, flanked by lawyers after her defenses had been worn down, felt calculated and cruel. It wasn't a precaution, it was a power play. She looked from the document to Victoria's triumphant smirk, then to Maxwell's averted eyes. In that moment, she understood that the carefully constructed facade of her life with Maxwell was about to be torn down, and she was not going to like what she found underneath. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the quiet thud of the document on the table. The thin-lipped lawyer, a Mr. Davies, cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice a dry monotone that methodically dismantled Nora's future. He didn't read the entire document, but summarized its most brutal clauses with chilling detachment. In the event of a divorce, Nora would be entitled to none of the Prescott assets, marital or otherwise. She would be required to vacate any Prescott property within 30 days. But the final clause was the true venom in the contract. It stipulated that, should the marriage end for any reason, Nora would be liable to pay the Prescott family a sum of $1 million in liquidated damages for the potential tarnishing of the family name and reputation. It was an instrument not of protection, but of humiliation and control. It was designed to ensure that if she ever wanted to leave, she would do so utterly broken and in debt. The air grew thick with Nora's silent shock. This wasn't a prenup, it was a leash. When the lawyer finished, Victoria leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a victor's light. She placed her manicured hands on the table, a queen surveying her conquered territory. "It's a simple matter, Nora," she sneered, the word dear conspicuously absent for the first time. "You come to this family with nothing but a library card and a sob story. We are protecting what generations of Prescotts have built. Sign the papers." She pushed a heavy gold-plated fountain pen across the table. "Sign it, or the wedding is off. You can walk out of here tonight with nothing but that dress on your back, and I will personally see to it that every door in this city is closed to you." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. This was the moment Nora had been dreading, the culmination of every slight, every insult, every dismissive gesture. With all her hope draining away, she turned her gaze to Maxwell. This was his final chance to be the man she thought she loved. Her eyes pleaded with him, begging him to say something, to stop this, to choose her. He finally looked up, his expression a miserable mix of guilt and weakness. He wouldn't look at his mother, only at Nora. "Nora, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Just sign it. Let's not make a scene. It's just a piece of paper. We can get through this. It's for the best. To keep the peace." The peace. His mother's peace, not theirs. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it didn't even hurt anymore. It was clarifying. The love she thought they had was an illusion, a fragile thing that he was willing to sacrifice on the altar of his family's name. Illusion. A strange calm settled over her. The heartbreak was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She picked up the heavy pen, its weight feeling significant in her hand. Victoria smiled, thinking she had won. But as Nora's fingers tightened around the pen, she wasn't preparing to sign her life away. She was preparing to take it back. Nora's lips parted. The words that would end her engagement, that would sever this toxic connection forever, were right on the tip of her tongue. The cold resolve in her chest was a new and powerful feeling. She was about to tell Victoria Prescott exactly what she could do with her legacy, her lawyers, and her spineless son. But before she could speak, a polite but firm knock echoed from the heavy oak doors of the Legacy Hall. Everyone turned, startled by the intrusion. The hall's manager, a man who usually radiated unflappable composure, poked his head in, his face pale and flustered. "My sincerest apologies, Mrs. Prescott," he stammered, his eyes wide. "But there is a gentleman here who insists he must speak with Miss Nora Turner. He says it is a matter of utmost urgency." Victoria's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "This is a private family matter," she snapped. "Tell him to make an appointment and leave." "I'm afraid that won't be possible." The voice that followed the manager into the room was calm, clear, and carried an undeniable weight of authority. The man who stepped inside was the absolute antithesis of the Prescott's world of ostentatious, inherited power. He was in his late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence that filled the space around him. His suit was impeccably tailored, but in a modern, understated style that spoke of earned success, not ancestral wealth. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand, and his composure was so absolute, so unshakable, that it immediately threw the room's delicate power dynamic into chaos. He was not intimidated by the mahogany, the portraits, or the scowling matriarch at the head of the table. He walked forward, his footsteps quiet on the antique rug. He nodded respectfully to the room at large before his gaze settled on Nora, and for the first time all night, someone looked at her with undisguised respect. "Pardon this most unusual interruption," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "My name is Paul Williams. I am an attorney, and I have some rather urgent and confidential business to discuss with my client, Miss Nora Turner." "Client?" Nora stared at him, bewildered. She didn't have a lawyer. Victoria rose slightly from her chair. "Your client? I think you'll find Miss Turner is represented by our counsel in this matter." Mr. Williams offered a faint, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I assure you, madam, my business with Miss Turner has nothing to do with this document." He gestured dismissively toward the prenup. The tension in the room, which had been focused entirely on Nora, now shifted and coalesced around the calm, mysterious stranger who had just walked into the lion's den and acted as if he owned it. Paul Williams placed his briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive click, drawing every eye in the room. He opened it and produced a single, slim file. "As I said, my name is Paul Williams," he began, his calm voice cutting through the tense silence. "I am the lead attorney for the estate of Marcus and Lena Petrov." The name meant nothing to the Prescotts, who looked on with impatient disdain. "For the last 18 months," he continued, "my firm has been engaged in an exhaustive international search on behalf of the estate, You see, Mr. and Mrs. Petrov, the founders and sole owners of EtherCore Technologies, were tragically killed in a plane crash 2 years ago. They left behind no known heirs. He paused, letting the name of the company settle in the air. EtherCore. Paused. It wasn't a household name like Google or Apple, but in the worlds of venture capital and advanced logistics, it was a titan, a multi-billion-dollar private corporation that had revolutionized global shipping and data management. One of the Prescott lawyers shifted in his seat, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The Petrovs had one child, a daughter, Mr. Williams went on, his gaze fixed on Nora. Due to a series of tragic and complicated circumstances involving their early life as political refugees, their daughter was briefly lost to the American foster care system as an infant. They spent decades searching for her, using every resource at their disposal, but were never able to locate her before their deaths. Their entire estate was left in trust for their lost child, should she ever be found. He slid a document out of the file. It was a copy of an old, creased birth certificate. We hired a team of the world's best forensic genealogists. They finally found a match a few months ago, a match that was irrefutably confirmed by DNA analysis last week. He pushed the document across the table to Nora. On it, she saw the names Marcus and Lena Petrov, and beneath them, listed as their daughter, Nora. The room fell into a state of absolute stunning silence. Nora stared at the paper, her own name, her own history, suddenly rewritten. Miss Nora Turner, Paul Williams said, his voice gentle but clear. You are that lost child. You are the sole heir to the Petrov estate. Once you sign the final transfer papers, you will be in control of EtherCore Technologies and all affiliated assets. The net worth is currently valued at approximately $9.7 billion. The number hung in the air, an impossible, reality-shattering figure, $9.7 billion. The entire Prescott fortune was a rounding error next to it. Nora slowly lifted her head from the document. She saw Victoria Prescott's face, which had cycled from anger to confusion to a pale, slack-jawed shock. She saw Maxwell, his eyes wide, a dawning look of avaricious, desperate calculation twisting his handsome features. The power in the room had not just shifted. It had undergone a tectonic upheaval, and the epicenter was the orphaned librarian, who, moments ago, had been worth less than nothing. The stunned silence of the Prescott Legacy Hall was broken by a single, deliberate sound, the scratch of a pen against thick paper. Nora, with a placid expression that betrayed none of the seismic shock she felt, took the heavy gold fountain pen that Victoria had pushed at her, but she didn't move it toward the signature line. Instead, she drew a thick, decisive black line straight through the entire signature block of the prenuptial agreement. Then, in the margin, in bold, clear letters, she wrote 2 words, I decline. She placed the cap back on the pen with a definitive click and set it down on the table. The small sound echoed like a gavel. She stood up, her posture straight and her gaze clear. The fear, the hurt, the feeling of being small and unwanted, it had all been incinerated in the blaze of the last 10 minutes. She looked at Maxwell, whose face was a pathetic portrait of greed and regret. He looked like he was about to speak, to start a new line of pleading, but she cut him off. The wedding is off, Maxwell, she said. Her voice wasn't angry or triumphant. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the serene finality of a closing chapter. She then turned her gaze to Victoria. The matriarch was white as a sheet, her mouth slightly agape as she stared at Nora, no longer seeing a penniless orphan, but a figure of immense, terrifying power. Thank you, Victoria, Nora said, her voice even. Terrifying power. Thank you for showing me exactly who you are before I made the biggest mistake of my life. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned her back on them, on the portraits, on the suffocating legacy of the room, and walked toward the door where Paul Williams was waiting. She didn't look back. As she reached the threshold, Mr. Williams paused. He turned to face the stunned group still seated at the table. From his briefcase, he produced a second, much thinner folder. He walked back and calmly handed it to the Prescott's thin-lipped lawyer. This, Mr. Williams said in a cool, professional tone, is a courtesy notice. We will be filing a lawsuit against Mrs. and Mr. Prescott on behalf of our client for defamation of character and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. My office will be in contact. He turned and joined Nora, closing the heavy oak doors behind them, leaving the Prescotts to drown in the ruins of their own avarice. Nora stepped out into the cool, damp Washington, D.C. night. The air felt different, lighter. She took a deep breath, the first truly free breath she had taken in months. She was no longer Nora Turner, the poor orphan. She was Nora Petrov, a name she didn't yet know, with a past she had yet to discover. She had a fortune she couldn't comprehend, and a future that was a complete, dazzling, and gloriously blank page. She had walked into the Prescott Legacy Hall a pawn. She was walking out a queen, leaving her gilded cage behind for a kingdom she never knew was hers.